Are you PCSing to Fort Jackson right here in Columbia, South Carolina? Well, if you are, you're gonna wanna watch this video because in this episode, we have a special guest that many of you may all know, and they have been through what you're about to go through. As a real estate agent, I've helped numerous active duty military who got orders to be stationed right here locally at Fort Jackson or even Shaw Air Force Base in Sumter, and countless veterans as well. And we want to thank you all for your service. All right, I want to welcome Tyanne, our client coordinator here at the Brandon Garon Team. Many of you that have reached out have probably had a conversation with Tyanne, and I know you've told me how amazing she is. So, of course, I want to thank you for everything you've done for the team. But more importantly, I brought you on because not only you're not originally from South Carolina, you're from New York, and we can dive into that, but you're a military spouse who's gone through the experience of trying to PCS while being overseas from entire virtual aspect. So after you got word that your husband and now your family would be relocating to Fort Jackson right here in Columbia, South Carolina. So thank you to your husband for his service, but of course, you as a military spouse and supporting your family. As I know, having many friends in the military, the spouse of the service member is a critical part of holding the glue together while they are away. And for those of you watching, stick around to the end. After we wrap up, I will jump over and share some details about the area to better help you find where you may consider living. But let's dive in. So I know you've told me before, but if you want to share with everyone your story of how you ended up here in South Carolina, where you've been before to help give perspective, and how much time you had when you found out your husband was being PCS to Fort Jackson and what that looked like.
Awesome. So that's kind of like a really multi-layered question, specifically because the military doesn't make anything very streamlined. So like you mentioned, originally my family and I are from New York. That's where my husband joined the military. And since then we have been stationed in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, which is Fayetteville, North Carolina. From there we went to Schofield Barracks, which is on Honolulu, Hawaii. And then after that we were in Vicenza, Italy at Caserma, Italy. And that is where we found out that we would be coming to Fort Jackson in Columbia, South Carolina. So I think from the moment we knew, we actually got fortunate. My husband actually chose to come here just because one, you can't do more than two overseas contracts back to back, and they do consider Hawaii overseas duty station. So after Hawaii, going straight to Italy from there, that was kind of our two overseas back to back. So we were going to have to come back stateside regardless. And we had our son over in Italy, so we just decided to try to get as close to family as possible. And the East Coast was kind of the best place for us. And my husband knew someone who was already stationed at Fort Jackson. And in the military, it's kind of a running joke. It's called Relaxin Jackson. So my husband was really, after a hard 10 years, looking for a duty station that was a lot more chill. He had a toddler now. So we just kind of wanted something where he wouldn't be gone as much. And Fort Jackson does have a reputation for kind of being a very much more slow paced, not a heavy training rotation schedule duty station. So he actually put in to come here, and we were fortunate enough to get that. And I would say from the moment he requested Fort Jackson till we got our official orders were maybe about 2, 3 months times. And this was kind of the height of the pandemic in 2021. So it was really kind of rough trying to plan a move to a place we've never been before, but we've done that time and time again. This was just our first time purchasing a house. So the process was a little bit different, and I wouldn't recommend buying a house virtually like we did, but we unfortunately just didn't have any other choice.
Gotcha. Okay. So now with saying that, I know you said you wouldn't have ideally done it that way. What would have you done differently now having gone through it? How would have you better approached it?
I think the best that we could do at the time was I did plan a trip to the States from Italy where I came kind of towards some new construction development, but specifically only in areas that I was kind of doing my research in. Every military base kind of has a Facebook group for each base where you could kind of get all your questions asked beforehand. So I think I had just done a couple searches to find out which were some military friendly areas relatively close to base. And I think That was the best that I can do, but I probably would have definitely, if it wasn't for the pandemic, booked another trip to the States to visit just because I had only a week amount of time and I had to, schedule in seeing family in that time, kind of shuffle the baby around because at that point nobody had met him yet, also while trying to shop for a house. So just being able to plan where I have more time. But unfortunately, that's kind of something in the military that you don't necessarily have the luxury to do. I know some people who get orders today and they have to be at the new place, their new duty station in 2 weeks. Some people get 2 months, and some people know a year out where they're going. So if I would have been able to have a little bit more time to shop around, I definitely would have liked that because we probably would have went the resale route instead of the new construction route.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay. Perfect. And so, why specifically would you think just because of the timing of the resale versus the new construction, or what was your mindset for saying that now?
Well, we went the new construction route just because the agent that we had at the time was a referral to us from another military family who went from Italy as well to Fort Jackson, and they were maybe about a month or two in their process ahead of us. So they had already gotten here, purchased a home, and they referred us to their agent. And she seemed specifically more familiar with the new constructions in the military realm. And for us, it was all about timing. We needed somewhere that was going to be ready at a very specific time, just because when you're military and you come down on orders, you have a specific date that you need to be at the new duty station no later than. So you kind of have a hard deadline when you need to be there, when the service member needs to report. But that's also kind of your hard deadline to finding a place to live. And with the resale route, we knew it could be a little bit more up in the air depending on how negotiations went. So for us, the new construction kind of gave us wiggle room because originally when we went under contract for our home was supposed to be done in September and we were scheduled to come in November, which at first we were a little concerned about. But again, this was kind of the height of that pandemic. So there were a bunch of delays with materials. So we actually had a construction manager who was really honest with us and was like, hey, I know it says September, but this house is probably not going to be ready until November anyway. And it worked out perfectly because we ended up closing virtually a week before we arrived. So by the time we got here, we got off the plane and got the keys directly to our house. So it literally, timing wise, was the real reason we went new construction. But just after kind of knowing what I know now as an agent, as well as living in a new construction, we would have preferred kind of to just put some elbow grease and love into something that had some really good bones and really necessarily had a little bit bigger of a lot as well.
Gotcha. Okay, perfect. Which that's perfect segue into the next question because now, as a real estate agent, kind of have a different perspective being on this side of things. And there's a lot of questions that when we're considering a new area, we want to ask and do ask, but as agents, there's only so much we can say. So going back now, being an agent, what questions would you recommend to somebody coming to the area to ask their agent that you think is critical that in the end of the day that the agent is allowed to answer?
I would definitely recommend one, if you're a military family specifically, asking about the proximity not only to base but to specific gates. I know most military people
Mm,
will kind of just ask, "Hey, how far is this from base?" And as someone who's not necessarily military affiliate, you would probably just say, "Oh, base is about 15 minutes," which would necessarily be true. But is it 15 minutes from this subdivision to the nearest gate? Because being a military family, you'll know very quickly every gate on the base is not equal. Some gates you'll have traffic backed up for miles. Some gates traffic is flowing a lot more frequently. So I would ask what's the nearest gate as well as what does traffic look like? Because that's a really big thing. A lot of these service members have to be at work at 05 in the morning, 06 in the morning. And if everyone has to be at a specific time, at a specific place at the same time, and also on bases, the gates have different times. That's another major important thing, which is why I would ask what gate is close, because maybe the gate that's nearest to your home or where you want to live, maybe that gate doesn't open until 9 a.m. but you have to be at PT at 06, which means you now have to go all the way around to the closest gate that's open. And that 15-minute drive may now be more like 25 minutes when you live somewhere kind of like here where there's not too many different ways to get to things. So that will definitely make a difference in your commute. And I know within the military community, commutes to and from work are super important to the service member. And I learned that the hard way when we lived in Hawaii, and my husband had a 35-minute commute because there was only one way to get to the nearest gate, and it only opened at a certain time. So traffic would be backed up for miles, and he would have to leave at about 4 a.m. to get to work at 6 a.m. That's how insane traffic was. So now I kind of know any base we go to, where's the closest gate? How far is it? What does traffic look like? But also for families that have children, what is the nearest school district? And also kind of doing your own research into what school district you kind of want to be in. I know now as a parent that with that, there's in Columbia a choice program where if you don't want your child to go to their zone school, you do have the option to apply to send them somewhere else. But you do have to factor in that they will not be able to get transportation to or from school. So also factoring in how far is the school that you want to send your kid to, because you may have to drop them off and pick them up every day. So those kind of things are really important for a military family, because if one person has to be in one direction at one time, but a kid has to be dropped off at another time, that could kind of make mornings super hectic. So those are questions when I'm looking for a place to live in a place I've never been before that are kind of at the forefront of my mind.
And keep in mind, later on, I'm going to be talking about the area to help you better find where you may considering living to be close to Fort Jackson. Yeah, I guess that's true. And also keep in mind too, with that, not every school has availability for
Yeah.
that. I know in the area I live, some of them are lotteries and they only let a couple kids in. So it's not a guarantee as well, even with school choice. But I think that brings up another good point about South Carolina specifically. And I know we've talked about this a little bit, the tax structure here, right? We have different tax structure for primary residents as well as secondary residents. And anyone that's watched any of my other videos have talked about that. But I know in the military world, you guys have to approach this a little bit different when it comes to applying for that and making sure to reapply for that, as well as some other nuances that can come up because of the primary and secondary residence. So if you can kind of expand on that from that perspective, from the military perspective of the tax structure here in South Carolina, because I know it is different than most states.
Absolutely. And I will say, I will mention this is my husband and I's first property. So I don't have other states' processes to kind of compare it to firsthand experience. But in the state of South Carolina, when you purchase a home, if it is your primary residence, you get a 4% tax rate, right? But if you are not a resident or if it's not your primary residence, you get charged at 6%. And that 6%, it's not necessarily a true 6%. And it may sound like, oh, it's just a 2% difference. It can't make that big of a difference in my mortgage, but it can make hundreds of dollars of difference in your mortgage. So specifically with military, what the state of South Carolina requires us to do is we have to apply for that 4% every single year. And they do not let you know. They don't give you a heads up. It's kind of just something you unfortunately have to stay on top of, because if you don't, you'll see 1 month your mortgage can increase hundreds of dollars. And I know personally someone that this has happened to. She forgot to reapply one year just because other states they'll only make military kind of do those type of processes one time when we first arrive. South Carolina makes us do it every year. Kind of I don't want to say betting on the fact that we will forget, but it kind of seems that way. And my friend definitely had her mortgage jump about $600. And in the economy, $600 can make or break some people. So it's definitely something you want to stay on top of. And that's also something for military families to keep in mind when you're leaving. I know if you're coming to Fort Jackson, you're not necessarily thinking about, oh, okay, when I sell my house, kind of what that looks like. But in the state of South Carolina, that is something you want to think about because, like I said, if that's not your primary residence, you will now have to pay that 6%. So once you go to PCS and you want to leave, if you decide that you want to rent out your property, that is going to make a drastic difference in your mortgage. So you may think, oh, I have, let's just say, a $1,500 mortgage. We're going to rent out our house we'll charge, let's say, $2,000, we'll pocket 500 bucks. But then when you leave and you PCS to another state, which is now your primary residence, you have to file your South Carolina home as your secondary residence. And that increase in your mortgage could unfortunately barely make you break even depending on what you're renting it for. So that's definitely something to keep in mind as a military family coming to South Carolina, thinking about purchasing a home. You kind of have to think a little bit ahead of the game on what you want to do with the property when you come up on those PCS orders to leave Fort Jackson.
Yeah, and that brings up a good point because years ago I did have a client that was actually stationed out at Shaw Air Force Base. And I know we talk about Fort Jackson a lot, but we do have some over in Shaw that actually stay here in the Columbia area. And when they moved, they ended up renting out their place as well. And 2 years later, they call me back and they said, "Hey, Brandon, like financially just isn't mathing out, right? We're spending all this extra money in the taxes and it's just barely making us break even." And so again, I know that is a big thing. And it brings up a point is while a lot of these videos are about buyers, we do help sellers as well. Either way, circling back, now that you've been in Columbia a couple years, we'll start with what do you enjoy most about Columbia?
Honestly, as just a big city girl naturally, I love Columbia's proximity to larger cities without it being a larger city. So for my husband and I, for any of the audience that's familiar kind of with the New York City area, we feel like we're only about an hour from that big city life, but we live in like Long Island, the suburbs, only about an hour away. So we kind of get to hop in the car, drive an hour to Charlotte, to Augusta, only 3 hours to Atlanta. Anytime we kind of get that city itch, but we don't have to live in the city and kind of have that hustle and bustle every single day, but we can get it when we want to.
Awesome, awesome. Now, on the same accord, what do you think frustrates you most about Colombia? You've been to a lot of places, right? You've been to Hawaii, New York, even overseas to other countries. What's something that frustrates you specifically about Colombia?
I think it would just be kind of the opposite of that. It's just the how small town it is. I will say for sure, it's definitely exceeded our expectations. We kind of, when we first got here, we're comparing it to Fayetteville, North Carolina. Anyone familiar with the Fort Bragg area, which when we were there in about 2014, 2015, was very slow paced, was very, very small town, and we were freshly out of New York City. So we were definitely fish out of water with kind of just the Southern life and how that goes. But I think Columbia still is kind of a little bit small town. So we do wish there kind of was more to do. We wish, although it is very family friendly, coming from a place like New York City where there's just a million things for you to do with your kid, or coming from somewhere like Italy where you can literally take your toddler anywhere and do anything. We do kind of just wish there was a little bit more to do. But in just the 4 years that we have been here, we have noticed just how quickly Columbia and surrounding areas are developing. So we know it's only a matter of time before it kind of gets some of those big ticket items that we're kind of missing.
Perfect. Well, and then to kind of wrap up, I'll leave it open to you. Is there anything else that you want to share? Again, being a military spouse that you want to kind of leave the viewers with that you think will best help them and kind of wrap up your viewpoint of it now?
I think that I would just tell specifically any military families who may be considering Fort Jackson or interested in Fort Jackson, or even if you just got orders to Fort Jackson and you're not thrilled about it, I can definitely tell you you're gonna like it more than you thought you would. I think the landscape of the area is kind of beautifully set up. Downtown area is very nice. The base here, super, super nice. It's a basic training base, so it is nicer than some other bases we've been to for sure. And I just think it's a perfect place to kind of raise a family. I think there's a reason that it is the duty station with the largest veteran population. A lot of We have a lot of clients, Brandon and I, who have been stationed here many, many years ago, many moons ago, and have come back at the end of their military career because this is kind of where they want to set up base. And I think it's kind of funny. Fort Bragg has a saying where it's like all roads lead to Bragg. For us, we think all roads lead to Fort Jackson because, ironically enough, this is the duty station that my husband went to basic training at 12 years ago. So the fact that we have come now here 12 12 years later, purchased our first home. We're raising our kid here. There's a reason that people come back. It is an amazing place to live, cost of living, military wise. It's an overall, it checks all the boxes.
Yeah, and I think too, there's a lot of benefits on the veteran side as well when it comes to those taxes. I know we talked about the taxes earlier, about the frustrations with it, but I know I've shared in other videos about the discounts that you get as a veteran, and if you're a disabled veteran, even more discounts that you get. So there's a lot of benefits to it. So again, I appreciate you and I appreciate your husband's service, and again, coming on here and sharing this because I know we get so many questions from the military world, and me not being someone who served in the military. My grandpa did, and I've had other family members, but I'm separated from a lot of that. And so all my knowledge comes from people like you and other friends I have in the military. And so I want to thank you for coming on here and sharing this because, we do appreciate all of our military, past and present. And anything that we can do to help them out, whether it is just the information we're providing here. But of course, if you do decide that you want to buy here locally, we'd be happy to help you out. And again, thank you again for coming on here and sharing this.
Of course, and thank you for having me, and just thank you for your appreciation for military life. It's a way of living. I know a lot of people think it's just a career, but it is genuinely a way of life. It changes every aspect of your life. Our world revolves around the military when you're a military family. So just being able to service military clients and just kind of get the jargon and kind of let them know you have someone on your team that understands I think makes us a really valuable team.
Yeah, and of course, I know you're always happy as our client coordinator. Many of you have told me when you reach out, Tyanne fills you in on a lot of those gaps before you even have a conversation with me. And of course, I know she's happy to, for those military families, answer a lot of those questions. Because again, I know we're going to have to talk afterwards about this whole different gate thing, because that's not something I knew until you just mentioned it now. So
Makes
that's going to help me in these conversations. But as well, I know that you're happy to help as well on the same side. Again, you're a licensed agent. You're able to help in these situations and answer questions for the service members as they're calling and reaching out to us. So having you as a resource is truly a very big help, not only for what you do for the team, but also on this accord, having that different perspective. Me relocating here, I had a choice. It wasn't like hey, you got to be here in a certain period of time. I got to do it at my own pace. But I know so many in the military, kind of like you said, you only got 2 months and you got to be there. It's not this slow, drawn out process that a lot of us get to do. So again, I know it's a completely different perspective, and I've learned a lot sitting and talking to you. And again, I know that you can be a resource for our clients if they have questions in this fast-paced environment that you all have to live in versus, again, a lot that we're dealing with relocation. It's like, well, I'm retiring in a couple years and I'm trying to get ahead of the game. So different perspectives.
Absolutely, 1,000%. But it can be done. If I can buy a home on Zoom in a place I've never been, Brandon, I can definitely get you in a home as a military family.
Yes, absolutely. And again, I definitely appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. All right. So as Tyanne talked about, knowing those base gates and where you're going to be living is critical to help make sure that your commute is not longer than you expected. And so we got to talking after we recorded the episode. She helped me understand this a little bit better to break this down so that you have a good idea if you're traveling to base, where you might want to live to help make that commute easier. And after we look at the actual Fort Jackson map, we'll pull up the large map so you can get a better idea of how far that commute might be. But let's first talk about the gates that Tyanne talked about, because this is really important. So gate 2 is going to be your main gate here off of Forest Drive. This gate, from what they say on the website, open 24/7. So this is going to be the main gate that you can access at all times. However, knowing that we have a lot of people that end up living in either Northeast Columbia or down in Lexington, these other gates are going to come in handy. So we'll start with gate 4. This is going to be much closer to the Northeast Columbia side. And so that one's going to be off exit 13 off of I-77. Decker Boulevard and Percival Road is going to be your closest cross streets. So gate 4 here, for anyone living in Northeast Columbia, this is going to be your easiest one. However, important to know, this one, as well as gate 1 that we'll talk about next, are only open from 5 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday. So like she mentioned, if you're a drill sergeant and you have to get to base before 5 a.m., your closest gate may not be the gate you're able to use. You may have to head down to gate 2, making that commute a little bit further. As well, she said plenty of times, again, because you have a lot of people commuting from Northeast Columbia, this entrance right here can back up all the way to the interstate, making it take longer to get on to base, whether they're doing inspections or whatever it may be that drags that process out. And another thing to know about it, depending on where you're heading to on base. She said for her husband, as soon as he got to the gate, it was another about 15 minutes to get to where he needed to go. If he had to come down here to gate 2, the main gate, because he was coming earlier, might take 20 minutes, might take longer. And she said because it is a drill school in the area, the speed limits on base are a lot slower. Heading down to gate 1, same thing again, Monday through Friday, 5 a.m. to 5 p.m. This is going to be closest coming off of Jackson Boulevard to those coming from Lexington, the more southern part coming up I-77. And then just to add on, you do have gate 5 here at the back of the base. Gate 5 here is back off of Leesburg Road, kind of the back way into it. Maybe coming from some of the other areas, this might be the easiest way in. However, Gate 5 has even stricter hours. It's going to be Monday through Friday from 5 a.m. to 8 a.m. for inbound traffic, and then 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. for outbound traffic. So again, that's where, like she mentioned, these gate situations may help determine where you want to live. Now let's pull up the regular map and we can talk about your commute to the area. And when I do it, just to make it easier, we're going to use that main gate, gate 2. And so just keep in mind that, hey, maybe gate 4 might save you a little bit of time on your commute, or maybe gate 1 can save you if those parameters fit within your time frame. But we're going to use that as the main reference point because, again, everybody's kind of in different situations. I understand that. All right, so again, here, pulling up the map, Fort Jackson right here in this section. That's that main gate we were talking about. Where I talked about, that gate down on the south end, closer to Lexington, and that gate up on the top end, closer to Northeast Columbia. Again, little reference to our area, downtown Columbia right here. Just east of it is going to be Fort Jackson. So those in Forest Acres, super close to the base right there. Lexington over here down this direction. Obviously you have close to the lake on the 29072 side, and then down south 29073, which has some benefits just because if the interstate's backed up, you can kind of cut these back ways to hit 77 to get around to Fort Jackson. And then of course up here in Irmo, having to cut across, and as far back as Chapin cut across, but then heading over to Northeast Columbia, Lake Carolina, cut in the middle, right? We talked about in some other videos, hard scrabble, trying to get down can cause a little bit of traffic. Out here towards Wood Creek Farms, taking I-20 down to I-77. And then of course, Blythewood, heading down I-77 straight to Fort Jackson. So hopefully this gives you a better perspective of the area. Now, how long are these average commutes? Now, I'm recording this at a time that traffic won't be that bad. So you have to take that into consideration. If you watch my driving video, I talked about that. Randomly during the day, it's not going to be that bad. 5 o'clock in the morning, traffic on the interstate might not be that bad. However, if you're having to get there at 8 o'clock and you got school traffic and other things, this may be factors that you'll have to add into that. But let me give you the general idea. So we'll start with Blythewood, just moving kind of furthest out, and then we'll work our way down and over to Lexington. So as you can see from Blythewood to that main gate, you're talking about 15.8 miles, 19 minutes. Hopefully that gives you that perspective and why we see quite a few people live up that direction. But as well, let's talk about Lake Carolina, because I have a lot of people call and ask about that. So from Lake Carolina, you can see how much more that drive takes just because of coming across all those roads. 20.8 miles, 28 minutes. And Hardscrabble Road taking about 29 minutes, 30 minutes. Now, as I talked about in that video, they're widening Hardscrabble Road, so hopefully it shortens that commute in the near future, but that's what we're looking at right now. As well, another neighborhood I talked about, and again, I know there's tons of neighborhoods, and if you want to reach out and talk to us about them, we definitely can, but I'm trying to give you the biggest perspective without dragging this video on forever. So Wood Creek Farms, like I talked about, up this direction, as you can see, super easy commute at 18 minutes right now, 12.4 miles, easy commute up that direction. Like I talked about, heading back, Forest Acres. I have some of you ask about that area as well. Super close to base. You're talking about only an 11-minute drive with a little bit of traffic right now, 3.2 miles, so super close to the area. Now let's talk about the south side of Lexington. So the Red Bank area, Bluefield, Longview, all those kind of neighborhoods. You're talking about, as you can see, 29 minutes. So almost the same as that commute from Lake Carolina, even though it seems that much further away. And as you can see on this, even though the interstate's the main way it's telling you to take, you have these back routes that I told you about that may save you time if there's traffic on the interstate during the time that you are trying to get over there. Out of the way, let's head down to Lexington on the 29072 side of town. So about the same, 29 minutes, 25 miles. As you can see, if traffic gets bad on the interstate, there are some alternate routes to get you around that area. Now let's head up to the Irmo area. Now with Irmo, and as we head out to Chapin, I always tell people that, of course, you're gonna have to hit this interchange right here, which, as we know, Malfunction Junction, this is the one that they're working on changing right now. This can cause quite a bit of traffic. And unfortunately, there's not a ton of ways around to avoid this. Even taking these roads isn't gonna avoid it too much. And a lot of them are taking you on that top side around. So you may get some traffic heading out that way. But as you can see, 27 minutes, 22 miles. And then rounding out with Chapin, so we pull up Chapin, South Carolina, and obviously that's going to make that probably the furthest commute that we talk about here. 36 minutes, 33.8 miles. Again, kind of forcing you through that interchange right there where you get a bit of that traffic. So again, if you're coming during that 7:30, 8 o'clock hour, it's going to drag this commute out further. You can actually see, let me show you this. If I say depart at Monday, go back to 7:30 a.m., you can see that can jump up to a 55-minute commute, right? Almost doubling your commute there just because of that hour. And we can kind of scroll through this and you can see that kind of drags on, and about 8:30 start teetering down. And let's go back, starts as early. I'm trying to give you the worst it could be. Go back. 7:15, you can see starts teetering back. So about 7:30 is that peak time. So again, if you got to be at base at 5 a.m., probably not going to have all that traffic. As you can see, we can back up and go to 5 a.m. And as you see, a little bit possible, but not as bad as per se that 8 o'clock hour that we saw. Either way, I hope this helps you better understand that commute and helps you maybe decide where you want to live and why. Like I said, you see a lot of people live in Northeast Columbia because of that, but just as many that do choose to buy on the Lexington side.